Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. We are presenting you with the 137th episode of POWERchat today, and we'll be discussing about the role of civil society organizations and the UN agencies addressing the COVID-19 crisis. Civil society organizations and the UN agencies have significant role to play during crisis, for which we today are discussing about the role of NGOs and the UN in particular responding to the COVID-19 in Nepal, focusing on strategies and actions overcoming the crisis, the plight of migrant workers and support to the vulnerable communities. Joining us today, Dr. Richard Howard, Director at ILO Country Office, Nepal. Welcome to the show, Richard Howard. Mr. Achyut Luitel is also joining us today, the chairperson of the Association of International NGOs in Nepal, who is also the regional director of Practical Action. We are also joined today by Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai, Deputy Secretary General of the NGO Federation of Nepal. Welcome to this show, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start with a very general overview of the situation. Today is the 76th day of the lockdown in Nepal. There are 13 deaths, more than 3,500 infections, and more than 160,000 people in quarantine. How are your offices and your organizations responding to this situation and supporting to the stakeholders you are engaged with? I'm starting with Mr. Achyut Luitel, who is the chairperson of the Association of International NGOs in Nepal. Mr. Achyut.
Hello, Laxman D. Currently, I am the chair of Association of International NGOs in Nepal, AIN. It is a loose network of about 129 INGOs operating in Nepal. According to the statistics, there are more than 250 INGOs, but under AIN we are 129, and they range from very health-focused INGOs to the generic INGOs. Generic means some are working on human rights, some are working on general nature of the community infrastructure, some are working on WAS, some are working on health, some are working on education. The situation is really alarming in Nepal because that was expected. That was expected because there are, millions of Nepali youths working in India, and they are certain to come back to Nepal because the situation in India was also not good for them. So we are expecting that they will be coming back home. Likewise, there are many other migrant workers in the Middle East and Malaysia and other countries who are queuing up to be back home. So that was expected. And as you said, today is 76th day of the lockdown. So when we started lockdown, there are only 2 cases. And at that time, it looked like the situation is under control because we're one of the countries in the South Asia where we had no deaths at all. And until 1 month or so, I think the positive cases were still within a double digit. And when the government thought that the situation is under control, then the NGOs and INGOs were not really welcomed to support the government. So we're working in isolation. Working in isolation means we're in the communities, obviously.
Mr. Luitel, I'm interrupting you. How are you working with your stakeholders responding to the government's attempts in addressing this issue in particular?
Yeah, let me come to that point because, when the situation was not that alarming, we were still in the communities. Our partners, NGOs, were in the communities. I think Arjunji will be highlighting how the NGOs are working, but we are not directly working on the ground. We are always working with our partners. They are the local NGOs.
Thank you, Mr. Luitel. I will come back to you. I'm going to Richard Howard, who is the director of ILO Country Office here in Nepal. Could you present with the overview of your work before and after the lockdown, Dr. Howard?
Hey, so good evening, and thank you very much for having me. It's good to be back. It's been a long time since we've seen each other. A lot has changed, pleasure. And I think in many ways the world has flipped upside down since we last talked. But the problems that we were facing 2 years ago are still very much there today, perhaps even more exaggerated. For ILO, we are not a humanitarian support agency, so our support has mainly been on how we can support in the economic recovery and job creation and social security, those three areas. But immediately what we are doing is, in respect to the migrants that are overseas, we are initiating a program with the non-resident Nepali Association to provide support to migrant workers in GCC countries and Malaysia. This will include some support for shelter, so support for linking them to legal aid services, for registration for return, temporary cash needs to keep them going until they can come home. Our understanding, and some GCC countries are facing very severe downturns, and those are affecting the migrant workers there. So our immediate priority is to work with those migrants overseas.
Dr. Howard, I will come back to you on these specific issues.
Okay.
Do you have any assessment on ways and needs supporting to your partners through the crisis? I mean, the government agencies and that of your own staff members and all. Any assessment of the situation on behalf of the ILO and your partner organizations working here?
Labor market assessment, looking at the impact on jobs in the country. We see about 2.5 million people are out of work because of this crisis, and more impact on small and self-owned enterprises, micro enterprises, small enterprises. Assessment there. We've done an assessment on the impact on businesses with FNCCI and CNI, using a standard methodology used across the globe, and another assessment on the impact on informal sector enterprises. So 3 assessments from us that we've carried out from the early days of the crisis. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Howard. I'm welcoming Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai, the Deputy Secretary General of the NGO Federation of Nepal. You are the umbrella organization of 50,000 plus NGOs in Nepal. How are you working, and what is your assessment about the situation?
Okay, thank you, sir, for having me for this power chat. It's very important show, and I want to make correction in your word. But we are only the umbrella of 6,500 NGOs. Actually,
there are 50,000 plus NGOs working here anyway.
Yeah,
please go on.
But yeah, the database is shows like more than 50,000, but that actually not correct data, because there is no any record of how many NGO collapsed. There is no any data, only the data of registration. So I had to come back in your questions. So what we are doing during this pandemic? Actually, this is the bit different situation than before. Now is because we cannot come in a real ground. Although what we are doing, we are monitoring human rights situation jointly with National Human Rights Commission, Nepal Bar Association, Federation of Nepal Journalists. So 4 organizations, we together monitoring human rights across the country. So we form already more than 77 district branches and 7 province committee, and all mechanism we established, and we are doing regular monitor. Not only the monitoring, also we are supporting food, materials, essential services, and other things in quarantine and other center, other like in the border area and other where the peoples are suffering for food and other. You see in many places of Nepal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bhattrai. I'm coming back to you again. I'm going back to Mr. Achyut Luitel. Mr. Luitel, could you tell us your own operational and financial challenges of addressing COVID-19? I mean, you are also leading an umbrella organization of the international NGO here in Nepal.
Upon the request of the government of Nepal, we negotiated with the donors, and we were able to divert some of the funds to respond to COVID. So in that way, many of the INGOs who are directly focused in the health sector, they are working very hard. They are providing ventilators to the provincial government. They are providing numerous amounts of, PPEs. They are providing all the medical, equipments. So that is happening through the most of the health-based organizations like Save the Children or World Vision or Care International, One Heart Worldwide, IPAS. So there are many, health-based organizations. And even other organizations who are not working on the health sector, they are also able to negotiate some fund from the government, the donors, and that money has been supported in the communities through the NGOs. So that was done for, supporting the quarantine management, also providing some of the relief materials. In the beginning, even the food packages were also given. Many of the INGOs are planning for cash transfer because it is much more efficient way of, providing support to the vulnerable population. But we are still not getting, the approval from the government because the government is in favor of the kind support. And apart from that, many of our partner NGOs are working in the point of entry in the borders where many migrant workers are coming. So they are providing the foodstuffs, they are providing water, and also helping in establishing the wash facilities like the hand washing and the latrines and so on. And in quarantines also we are providing support. But most of the member organizations in the communities, they are working with many other, existing networks on the ground. And we are helping and providing the wash facilities in many of the villages, likewise the relief materials. So that is happening.
Well, so you are reaching out to the vulnerable groups through your partner organizations, trying to say
Yes.
that, right? Dr. Richard Howard, the plight of migrant workers is something different here in Nepal during the time of this crisis. There are thousands of labor force of migrant workers stranded alongside the borders and in destination countries, waiting immediate rescue and support. How do you see this situation? How are you observing the efforts of the government of Nepal?
I think this is a situation that no one really imagined would be so severe and so quick. And the number of workers that came through India in the recent weeks have really been beyond expectation of the government. So I think it hit them very hard and very fast, and they weren't necessarily prepared for that level of people coming through. I think in the recent days, there's been significant improvement, and we have to acknowledge the role of NGOs and INGOs that were very fast to come in and provide the support to the government. So I think that situation is slowly coming into control. The next big challenge will be the migrants coming through from the GCC countries and Malaysia. And we think the numbers will be very high there as well. We realize that the government does have more control over the numbers of people coming in daily, but the challenge for the governments, for the municipal governments, the challenge to create job opportunities for these people coming home will be immense. So ILO will have to really take some very drastic measures with the government, with the municipal governments, with the employers to address the situation.
Well, Dr. Howard, how do you see the government's repatriation plan of the migrant workers that the government approved last Sunday? That says that the FATE application to return home is to be decided based on their status. Do you have any data observing the status of migrant workers stranded alongside these borders and also in the destination countries?
I mean, we have mixed data, and as I said, the quality really ranges by country. For example, in Kuwait, we know that as much as 15,000 people are prepared to return to Nepal. Many of those were given amnesty and the chance to leave the country without any kinds of repercussions. GCC countries also very large numbers, but we don't have exact numbers throughout the GCC, and Malaysia also. So we think that as many as 500,000 migrant workers from GCC and Malaysia could return in the next 3 to 4 months, if it's possible for them to return. Now, the government can control the flows, but the demand to return is very high. And I think given the downturn that we see in the global economy, in the GCC economies, that many of those, as much as 1/3 of those migrants who come back, it will take at least a year before they have an opportunity to go back again, if not more. So we have to be prepared here for a large influx of people needing livelihoods, needing jobs, needing cash, as our colleagues have said, that cash is very much needed at the initial stage of return, then job opportunities. It's going to be a big burden on the government and NGOs.
What are your suggestions for overcoming such burdens? Dr. Howard?
I mean, I think the way to overcome this is not easy and it's not quick. The need to stimulate job creation requires the government to take a different approach for opening up the economy to foreign investment. We need to see large inflows of investment into the country, which have been stalled or moving very slowly. We also need to see an improvement in the business environment for small and medium enterprises so that they can access the support that they need and grow their businesses without significant burdens on them. And we know they still face the same challenges they did before. Some of the government programs that are being put into place are very, very, commendable. But for example, the Prime Minister's Employment Program can address immediate or short-term employment needs of people coming back to the country. But that program itself has a poor track record in implementation and delivering the number of work days that are needed. More or less, how these programs can support communities to create viable infrastructure, viable products for the community, so that the community can grow and progress. And we haven't seen that in the earlier year of implementation of that program. So there are programs in place, but they certainly need to run much better than they have in the past. And
thank you, Dr. Howard, for this situation analysis. Arjun Bhattrai, how is NGO Federation and your affiliated organizations are working in addressing the needs of vulnerable communities at the time of pandemic, especially that of the women and children and homeless and the poor people here in Nepal? How are you assisting to the ongoing efforts?
Actually, we are not that much satisfied because the government only the most recently they developed the action plan to mobilize the civil society, because the situation it was very difficult to go in the field and support the community. But now the government, Ministry of Women and Senior Citizen Ministry is very now is coordinating to civil society, and now we are preparing to support to quarantine center and vulnerable community, as you said, that children, senior citizens. And now we contributed over $100,000 US to government this relief fund, and also individual organizations. They are working with local authorities, municipalities and rural municipalities, and some places they directly supporting to the victims or the vulnerable communities. Still we are waiting the government action plan to implement in the real sense. So how the INGOs and NGOs can go in the field with secure manner and support to the community. So but at the NGO Federation we developed some our own policies, and now we started to supporting to now these holding centers. Now we are supporting to the all holding centers together with the INGOs. Maybe Achyut explain more better on that issues. And we are regularly discussing with the planning commissions and the Ministry of Social Welfare, Ministry of Women and Senior Citizens, and the Social Welfare Council.
Arjun Bhattrai,
we will come in a concrete plan.
Arjun Bhattrai, do you have any restrictions posed by the COVID-19 to your work at the moment?
Yeah, it's because of the lockdown, so all our offices all closed, and also this financial transaction and also our resources from the foreign country is not coming. So many things is not the regular work we are doing. But
how are you coping with this situation then?
As a humanitarian organizations, we now with the Social Welfare Council, they gave an opportunity to change our resources to respond to COVID-19. So we almost 20% of our project we changed to the response, and for the response to where the victims, where the vulnerable community. But Actually, as Arjun said, that we support the government like PPE and other security materials, other like essential things, foods and other things. But now we all civil society want to go in the field and want to support the community. But some action plan or guidelines need to.
Thank you, Arjun. I'm coming back to Mr. Achyut Luitel. You said that the NGOs working within your associations have different kind of expertise, and they are working in different areas. And you also mentioned about health and emergencies as well. How are you supporting the ongoing process on part of the health and those of the frontliners here in Nepal?
For all the health issues, there are three mechanisms mainly, because if you are supporting the relief materials or the medical equipments, then we can get, the permit from the government. So we can get the vehicle pass and we can send to the municipalities or to the wards. So the thing is that, we send all the equipments or the material to the municipality or the ward office and we hand it over to them. And they are already given, where this should be provided. It can be according to their own plan, and if some of the NGOs have limitations to work in some of the specific communities, then we categorize and we tell them that these need to be, reached to these communities. Another mechanism is we hand over the things to the provincial governments. Like Nick and Simon Institute, they are providing even the ventilators to the provincial governments. Then another mechanism is whatever relief materials or the medical equipments mainly, that can be deposited in the Ministry of Health and Population. Then Ministry of Health and Population takes care about, sending it to different parts of the country. So these are some of the conduits, through which we can provide the support. We ourselves cannot go to the, field because of the lockdown and also getting, enormous difficulties in getting the vehicle pass. So we have to fully rely upon our partner NGOs, and even the partner NGOs also cannot move. But they have people, in the villages, they have people in the communities. Sometimes we have the cooperatives, sometimes we have the users committees, we have the focal persons, the village resource persons, and through them we are reaching to the communities. But we ourselves are not able to reach on the ground.
Well, Dr. Richard Howard, I'm coming back to you on what are your specific suggestions to the government of Nepal addressing the challenges faced by migrant workers, especially the stranded one?
Yeah, so we've been working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and trying to help support the consulates in those countries to provide improved support to the migrants there. I think those that are there need a great deal of support. Some people are without housing, their wages have stopped, they don't have a way to get home, they want to come home, and I think they have the right to come home. So my suggestion to the government is bring as many back as possible and make sure that they have a safe way of re-entering the country that's not putting the whole country at risk for COVID infection. I think that's priority number one. But the second thing is really to move forward with the livelihoods and job creation strategies at municipal level so these people can be received and get back to work quickly.
Well, what you have to say to the criticism that the challenges or the problems faced by migrant workers, especially alongside the Indian borders, are not appropriately addressed. They are demanding their return to home. Any specific suggestions that the local or provincial and the federal government can do at the moment to rescue them?
I think, it's not entirely fair to criticize the government. I think they underestimated the numbers coming back. They had no idea how many would come back at one time. I do think they're doing the best they can. These municipal governments are newly formed units addressing a crisis that really is unheard of anywhere in the world, and now they're having to deal with it. So I think the responsibility, rather than to criticize the government, is to come together with the NGOs, the international NGOs, the development partners, and get that immediate relief out there quickly. That's job number one. We also have to address the stigma and discrimination that these people face, because they are being treated as agents of a disease that is not their problem. They have a right to come home, and they have a right to be welcome to their communities and to find jobs. And so I think that's beyond government. That's an all of society effort. We all have to stand together on this. This is a crisis, and it's not really a time to throw criticism. It's time to come up with solutions and implement them together. Back to you.
Well, my follow-up questions to Arjun Kumar Bhattrai and then to Achyut Luitel, the same question. What is your observation about the rescue operations and the humanitarian assistance to those stranded alongside the Indian borders and also in the destination countries who want to come back to home, but they are facing a lot of problems?
Yeah, I agree, Richard, that this is the time to work together. So government putting their effort, but still there should be more effort, because this is a situation, not like other country, because more than 50,000 people is coming the same time in the Indian border. So need to put effort, and then need to contribute more resources, not only the effort. And then sometimes it's like who is the responsible? Our local government, our province government, our national government, because sometimes they give a responsibility to local government, but the local government cannot do the alone the big number of people to hold in the same time. So I think still government need to request like civil society, development partners, or UN systems, and need to work together, not alone. So that is my suggestion. So otherwise it will be more worse in the upcoming days.
Mr. Achyut Luitel, on same question.
I think I'm not criticizing, but we tried to stop the migrant workers in the border as long as we could. But once the modality of lockdown in India eased out and limited mobility was allowed, then the pressure was coming on the border, so that couldn't be resisted. So because of that, that was a kind of explosion of people coming inside the country, and that really made all the situations bad. Otherwise, the quarantines were prepared. There were adequate. We thought that there were quite a number of the facilities available. But if people are coming in double fold or triple fold, then management is going to be very, very difficult. So perhaps we are still delaying, to change the modality of lockdown. Perhaps we have to, make zoning according to the vulnerability. And perhaps we should allow the development partners to, operate on the ground, but they also need to be assured that there are, safety facilities available. For example, accommodation in the border towns, like in the small towns. So unless that is assured, then nobody is really willing to go there. So gradually we need to ease out the situation so that people can go and provide more support. Then I think the support can be more qualitative as well. And simultaneously, we should be bringing resources because the NGOs, INGOs, they cannot bring huge, enormous, amount of resources. So the government should be stopping, unnecessary expenditures, and they should be diverting the funds mainly for COVID response. And these funds should be, allowed for job creation and also, for SMEs as well as, for enhancing the production. So I think that is the only way out. And the government is already, considering this. The National Planning Commission is already, giving a lot of emphasis on production and, the job creation and the enterprise development. So the government is, I think, moving the right direction. But because of the pressure of the migrant workers, the situation seems to be a bit unmanageable. But once all the development partners come together, I think there will be gradual improvement.
Well, Mr. Achyut Luitel, my follow-up question again to you and then to Arjun, and same follow-up question to Richard Howard. Often there is criticism that the resources coming at the time of crisis, disaster or pandemics like these are not appropriately used, and there is accountability and transparency question. How do you assure that the resources coming at the time of pandemic or disaster are very appropriately used, and they reach out to the needful people, beginning from Achyut Luitel, then Arjun, and then to Howard.
Yeah, I can speak on behalf of the INGOs. In case of INGOs, enormous amount of money is not coming. So whatever resources we are mobilizing, we are trying to adjust from whatever we have. So we have been negotiating with the donors to allow some portion of the money to be, do on COVID response. And obviously we also need to follow all the procurement, procedures. And we are following that because of the, the new technologies, the advanced technologies. The online services are also available. We can get connected through, the internet. Although we are working from home, but, the bank transactions, collecting the quotations, identifying the vendors, reaching out to them, that is all possible. And once they are providing, some of the medical equipments or other kind of logistics, it is quite possible to, send to the appropriate places. So I can assure that in INGOs, the misappropriation is very less likely. I cannot say that, it is completely zero, but all the INGOs are, towards zero tolerance towards any kind of misappropriation or corruption. And whatever we have done, it is according to the procedures by taking, the proper approval system.
Arjun Bhattrai.
Yeah, it is this time is this pandemic, COVID pandemic is different than other like earthquake and other situation. And then now, as I said already, that like we supported through the local authorities or through the government channel. So as NGO now there's not directly that much supporting in the community. Only that we support some food or some essential materials. So I didn't think like that it will last this time, but sometime as you said, like sometimes there question of accountability, our governance issues. But now, as Achyut said, that there's social media is very active nowadays, and then also the government mechanism also very strong now, is a monitoring mechanism, and the fund which given by the donor agency. Also, donor agency nowadays they are very sensitive to utilize their resources. And in this pandemic situation, there is no resources. I think there is very few donor agencies supporting this time. Only we modify our previous resources, like less than 20%. We contributed to the government or local authorities, or some sort of distribution of essential materials. So we are not mobilizing that much funds as we mobilized during the earthquake. So I am to make assured there is no any any kinds of this kinds of fraud or any other kinds of misuse of the funding.
Dr. Howard.
From the UN side, very similar to the INGOs, the procedures in place, they put a great emphasis on targeting and making sure that we reach those that are most vulnerable, and two, the processes are very much transparent and careful and to manage money. The problem is these processes are also slow, and in a crisis, sometimes it looks like we're not moving fast enough. And I think here the partnerships with the NGOs and the INGOs, moving money to these organizations is critical at this time, because they're closest to the ground and they're the best at targeting, I believe. And I think more resources should be going in their direction. And in terms of the government, I find that, really our biggest challenge is getting the government, our line ministries partners, to use the expertise we have. It's on the table, it's there, we have people willing to support them from all over the world, but sometimes they go in a different direction and they don't necessarily take advantage of the strengths that we have as UN in a crisis like this. And it's there. I mean, it's a bit frustrating sometimes that I feel like we're underutilized in a situation like this. Back to you.
Do you want to comment on the recent media report that the United Nations is sending its staff to the missions at the time of COVID-19?
Yeah, I read that with great interest. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah, please go on.
Is my mute off? Okay. Yeah. I read that with interest. I saw my picture on the cover of that article that I was traveling, and certainly I didn't know that I was traveling. I had no plan to travel, and I don't think it's appropriate for ILO doing the kind of work we're doing to travel at this time. Now I know that other UN agencies were traveling. World Food Program was traveling and carrying essential supplies to these locations that needed those supplies. And Yeti Airlines had provided an aircraft at cost at a very reasonable price. But this was a humanitarian mission, the first one. And the second mission also was about going out and providing much needed assistance to the government. So I think the article was not well researched because, for one, I was never intending to travel and did not travel. And to see my picture there, I think that was quite unfair. So I don't know. I think it's unfortunate that people misunderstand when there is action taken. But of course, if no one did anything, if we didn't send supplies, if we didn't go, we would seem apathetic and slow and inactive. So I think it's unfortunate criticism. But I will say this, we all have to look at ourselves. We have to look at our organizations and saying, are we doing enough? Are we using our money properly? Are we fast enough? And I think the answer is often we're not doing as well as we should. And I think the media should hold us accountable every step of the way. But I think articles like this should also be well researched and fair in the process. But criticism is always valid in a situation like this. People should be on our heels and expecting us to do more and do better. I think that's a very valid concern. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Howard. I'm coming back to Mr. Achyut Luitel. The impact of this pandemic will go for a long time. Do you have any specific measures to address this impact in future? Are you shifting your development priorities here in Nepal as the chairperson of AIN? How are you preparing to cope with this situation in future?
Yeah, thank you, Laxman D. Most of the NGOs are working with a kind of, very innovative framework. So when we started working, the first, duty was to limit the spread. So that was in the short-term basis. Then again, we have to make sure that the essential services and supplies are, in place. So these are some of the things which we try to do. Still now, that this has been the practice. And again, referring to your earlier question, it is also about new way of working. For example, if many NGOs are, doing the parallel process to procure the goods that we require to respond for COVID, then it is going to be very cumbersome and it is going to be a lot of hassles from administrative point of view. So what we did, a number of NGOs, 16 or 17 NGOs, they came together, they calculated what amount they can really, divert for making procurements. Then one of the NGOs took the responsibility by collecting quotations, developing the specifications, checking the specifications, procured. Then again, the vendors were supplying to the, different NGOs. So these are some new ways of working, because this is a pandemic situation and sometimes the regular procedures do not work. But again, coming to the long term, we need to, most of the NGOs, they are working on long-term recovery and resilient plan so that when there is another pandemic like COVID, then we are better prepared. So that means how we can enhance the health governance, health facilities. Then again, we need to have new normal, which means for many, many years, we have to live with COVID. Although the vaccine will be coming in maybe 1 year time, but again, getting access for every people in the world, that is going to be, very, very lengthy process. So we have to manage, we have to live with, the COVID. So that means we have to improve our behaviors, how we can, be much safer, and how we can make sure that we are not infecting others, even we are carrying the virus. So from that point of view, we are working on more the resilient kind of approach according to the new normal that will be, later on defined.
Well, thank you, Mr. Achyut Luitel. Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai, how are you preparing to direct your programs in future?
Yeah, one thing like as a national umbrella that we are doing this human rights monitoring, and we are doing jointly with the NHRC, and then that is very effective, and we are continue that monitoring, because the NHRC will suggest recommendation or any new new things to the government, and then government will implement. And the second, this our line ministry of this women senior and senior citizens, they develop an action plan. So we're working with those action plans. So where the government request to support, then we support to the government. And then the third is like there is a other mechanism developed by the National Planning Commissions. So we are supporting through this mechanism. And also we are the part of this development partners. It means that our most of the NGO getting money from the INGOs. So sometimes our priority goes jointly with INGOs, where the INGO want to contribute and our member organization they will support. So, but our as a national umbrella organization, our plan to support to more on the health, essential health, primary health, to improve the primary health, and employment generation, because now it's like no more. I think awareness there is important, still need, but are focusing to how to create the job. That is the more important. So we request to all NGOs, let's start to do some employment generation activity, or some micro enterprises or other sector, or cooperative establish or something like that. So we need to change a little bit. We need to shift it, the paradigm shifted, awareness raising, capacity building to employment generation activity. So
well, thank you, Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai. Richard Howard, do you have any priority shift at the moment, or how are you planning to deliver your support here in Nepal in future?
So one of the priorities will be, and we just sent a range of materials and policy examples and guidelines on how to help enterprises, businesses restart and protect their workers from COVID infection. So the safety and health angle, how we can provide guidance to businesses, how they can restart and still protect workers. Now, ILO's developed materials globally. We've worked with the several business organizations to develop guidelines and distribute those in Nepali language. And we'll also support the Ministry of Labor to develop a policy on this. So that's one priority. In the next week or so, we'll initiate, as soon as the lockdown ends, and I'm not sure when that will be, but we'll initiate a large-scale road maintenance project. Will provide short-term opportunities, particularly to women, to do basic road maintenance in the rainy season, to keep the roads clear during the rainy season, but also keep people working. That will employ thousands of workers. At the municipal level, I think there's an important opportunity to support those governments with job creation strategies, and that includes working to support the Prime Minister's employment program in key municipalities where large-scale migrants will return, to make sure that program runs better, to support SMEs, as you mentioned before, improving the policy environment and access to microcredit, all the things that SMEs need to create jobs. That will be critical. In the longer term, we'll also be working on the Social Security angle. Had we had a strong unemployment insurance scheme, which was in the law, but not yet developed because we were all dragging our feet on this, we would be in a much better position now. So now we start building better social security system in the country for informal workers, for daily wage workers, most vulnerable workers, so the next time we have a crisis, we're better prepared. That will be a priority. And finally, we'll work on social dialogue. The dialogue between workers and employers, organizations, and government, to make sure that we come out of this crisis in a way that doesn't harm workers, but also keeps and helps to support businesses to recover. We need a right balance between workers' needs and employers' needs, and we'll continue to support those dialogues with the Ministry of Labor. Back to you.
Well, thank you, Richard Howard. There are many interesting issues coming up from your part, but we are coming to the end of the show. But I have a final question to each one of you, starting from Mr. Achyut Luitel. What are the opportunities that can be created alongside such pandemics, and how can we see this pandemic situation as an opportunity in the sector of development? Very quickly.
this is eye-opener, Laxman Ji. That means, the government and all the INGOs, development partners, NGOs should be investing more on health governance, including the insurance, which Richard was just saying. Then we are getting back a lot of youths. They are the migrant workers. They have also got skills. So how we better use the skills? So we should be working very closely with, the industrialists, the people who are in the business sector, so that a lot of job creation can be done. Likewise, again, we need to have a better kind of agriculture, because we will be facing, food crisis. India will not be sending, as much food as they used to send before. So that means we need to enhance our own production. So what kind of technology, what kind of input, then easy access to finance. So these are some of the, areas where all the development organizations should be working, and the government should also be preparing a long-term framework, so that the banks, the financial institutions are willing to, give finance to the youths without any collaterals, or by simplifying the rules, so that the youths are more attracted to remain in the village and again, make the fallow lands fertile. Then obviously we need to have more industries, which we should be trying to restrict imports, so that most of the productions can be done in the country. So that's how I think the job creation can be done. So these are some of the
things. Thank you, Mr. Achyut Luitel. Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai, very quickly, your final thoughts.
I agreed with Achyut. Like we have to focus this time the universal health facilities, and this is the very right opportunity to develop our health services and essential materials. Hospitals need to improve all the things. And second, in the opportunity to engage the young people in the different sector, like the employment generation, because there are many young people returning to country, and then they are now they are interested to stay in the Nepal. So we need to focus to how we can keep continuing the young people in future. So this is the right opportunity. And the third is like, this is the pandemic situation. So we need to focus our budget on our resources, and to support to the real poor or marginalized vulnerable community. And we need to sometimes we need to modify our development paradigm, from like closer development to how we support to build the human resources, capable human resources. So this is the real time. So we need to focus to do a couple of things.
Well, thank you, Arjun. Richard Howard, your final thoughts on utilizing this situation in future?
I think it's hard to add to my colleagues here. They've said everything quite well. I think this kind of crisis exposes the cracks in the framework of society, the lack of a social security system to protect workers, very kind of weak employment creation approaches in the country. We need a better environment to support businesses to grow, SMEs, and to make sure that we support informal enterprises with incentives to formalize. These are all areas that we realize we should have done before, and we need to do them now. I think as organizations, as UN, we also have to reflect on our own weaknesses and how we can respond better in situations like this, and learn from this case study and make sure that we do better every time. Back to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Richard, and I would like to thank each one of you. Thank you, Dr. Richard Howard, the Director of ILO Country Office, Nepal, Mr. Achyut Luitel, Chairperson of the AIN and the Regional Director at Practical Action, and Mr. Arjun Kumar Bhattrai, Deputy Secretary General of NGO Federation of Nepal. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you all. Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Thank you.